There's a couple points to make. I mean, New York City, especially, there's neighborhoods in Manhattan that are like the fountainhead of all money in campaigns. And presidential candidates hardly ever campaign in New York, but they all come here to raise money because there's just so much of it. And a lot of that, almost all of it, comes from wealthy business people. There's a couple of odd things about that, though. Not all the wealthy business people are Republicans. In fact, a lot of them are quite the opposite. And because they're in New York City, they're represented by and large, by Democrats, both in Washington and in Albany. And so their money and their influence doesn't necessarily translate into Republican posture in the government in the big picture. What it does translate into, though, is lots of little things, tax breaks for this kind of development, or a grant, or a low-interest loan. And a lot of that really does stink to high heaven. And when you can find it, it's journalistic gold. When you can pinpoint, a donation or a series of donations to a particular transaction or a bill that passed, that's great. That, if anybody hears about anything like that, my email is right in the paper. But then there's this equally large tidal wave of money that's coming from completely the opposite direction, and it ends up being, I think, much more powerful on the big picture in Albany. It's coming from especially public employee unions. They raise little bits of money from all their members, and they pool it into these big political action committees, or in some cases they're effectively dipping into their pension funds, or they find these pots of money, and they not only they donate heavily, but they set up these volunteer organizations that do phone banking and canvassing and campaigning, and they end up being ultimately much more influential on decision making in Albany than the sort of big business plutocrats.
A lot of these circumstances are taken for granted by journalists. How many articles can you think of from the last few decades about the many contributions that Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae were making to members of Congress, and the lobbying they were doing with their quasi-public money? And this was all kinds of legislation was passed over these years to respond to what these quasi-government organizations wanted to have passed. These were places where people would be parked for high-paying jobs in many cases, jobs that paid millions and millions of dollars in terms of the stock benefits that they got. These stories didn't get written. Now you see it mentioned because of what's happened with the Fannie Mae and the Freddie Mac, but generally these stories weren't written, and the journalists just took the situation for granted. There was one more last question, the gentleman there.
I'd just say an amen to what Bill said, and I've already said that I'm a liberal Democrat, but I'm telling you, I couldn't agree more with Bill. We're on exactly the same page about the incredible influence and negative influence in many, many ways that public employee unions have on public policy in New York State. I think it's a scandal that Shelley Silver had his victory party at the United Federation of Teachers headquarters, and I think it's a commentary that the leader of the Democrats in the Assembly would be so blind to them as a special interest that he would have his victory party there. They really don't, a lot of Democrats in Albany don't even understand that this is a special interest. They don't even really perceive that it is one. And I couldn't agree with Bill more that their power in Albany is awesome, that they support self-interest legislation, that they can get passed it. By the way, the Republicans have been as bad at supporting as Democrats. It's an insider commercial party in Albany. It's an insider commercial party that is built around the relationships with these unions. Nobody had a stronger relationship with some of these unions than Joe Bruno did. And I think it is really a primary cause of the problems that we have seen in Albany.
And it's not a phenomenon limited to New York State, because New Jersey has the same problem too. Governor Corzine has literally and figuratively been in bed with the unions. And just recently, there was a bill to be signed that if it had been signed last month, which he could have done, instead of being delayed for a month at the behest of the unions, as Corzine did, which is going to cost the taxpayers $300 million, because he could have changed the pension situation for the teachers who started work in September. But the union said, wait until October and other government employees, but it's mostly teachers, wait until October to sign the bill, because then those people will get underneath and they'll be under the old pension system. So this stuff isn't just in New York State nor in New Jersey.
My opposition to the property tax cap has absolutely nothing to do with the complaints that the unions have made about it. It just pays no attention to wealth and need. I think if you're going to do something about property taxes in New York, you shouldn't reward those who don't need rewards. It has nothing to do with the objections that the unions make.